Medical Device Marketing Podcast. Today I'm here with Becca Brady, one of our account directors at Podimos. Welcome, Becca.
Hiya, thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So have you ever wondered how to start a customer-centric marketing campaign? Or in fact, what even do we mean by customer-centric? If you're wondering this is the absolute right podcast for you. So we're going to go through everything to do with what customer-centric is, how you set it up, and the positives and negatives around this. So Becca, a great thing to start with here is what do we mean when we say customer-centric? Because I think people have different understandings of what this term is.
Mm-hmm. So customer-centric is talking about the things that your customers want and need to hear about versus talking about the things that you think they want to hear about or the things that you want them to know. And I think that's definitely two different things. And customer-centric is focusing on the questions and the topics that your customers want to know.
Totally. So really, and actually what one of the biggest issues we see, or one of the biggest issues I'd say we see when it comes to marketing, is because everybody knows their own business so well, they're very keen to talk about what they want to talk about versus what their customer actually wants to hear. And there could be a couple of reasons for this. So it can be because you just know your own topic really well, or because you actually don't really know what your customer is asking. But you probably do know what your customer is asking. So how can you actually find out, Becca, what is excellent customer-centric content? So what is your audience asking?
There's a few ways of doing that. One of the main ways I always recommend is speak to your sales team, because your sales team is speaking to your customers all the time. So they're the ones that are fielding these questions every single day. And I think initially when we speak to sales teams, there is that initial staring at you blankly, being like, I don't get any questions. And then actually, the more you talk about it, the more they just keep popping up. And it tends to be, you think of one question a customer's asked, and that will spur 5 or 10 more questions that a customer has asked on that topic. So that's something that I don't think people do enough, but actually going to your sales team who are on the front line and asking them what are the questions that you get all the time is a great starting point. And you can run a workshop dedicated to bringing all your sales team in and going through the questions that they're getting on a regular basis.
Totally. And that can be quite a big investment, bringing your whole sales team off the sort of, out of the market for a whole day. But we find whenever you do that, the information you get is absolutely invaluable because everybody bounces off each other. And what we also find is that people say the same things. So we find there's common questions that people or the audience is asking on an ongoing basis. So to start off with, when we start looking at customer-centric content, you find it's really easy to identify probably what the first 3 months of customer-centric content looks like, because they're the questions that are asked over and over and over again to your sales team.
Yeah, and I think the reason as well, doing it with a whole group of salespeople versus doing it, one-on-one, is going back to the idea of bouncing ideas. And one salesperson might say they had a question about, I don't know, like how a product works, and that will spur another salesperson to be like, oh, actually, I got a question that was kind of similar, but not really on this topic. And it gives those salespeople, you get a more natural conversation when there's multiple salespeople in there. But there are other ways of doing it as well. Having your marketing sit on your sales calls is a really great one. And that's also really useful to see, once you've made your customer-centric content, is your customer-centric content that your marketing team is it working? Are the sales team actually using it? Are they actually sending it out? So that's a two-way benefit there. Getting your marketing team to go out onto your field visits is also something that I think is really useful. And then KOL user groups. So the same way as you got your sales team in, having your KOLs all sit down and talk about the questions that they have is another way for you to get some really great customer-centric content.
And I think the big sort of takeaway in everything that we've just been talking about is use your sales team. Because your sales team, and I think that's one thing maybe that isn't used enough, your sales team are on the front line all the time. They know exactly what your audience needs. and because they're always asking the same questions. But that KOL user group is fantastic as well to have a look at where market trends and what the future questions could be as well. So it's a really interesting mix there. So once you've got all of your questions, because that is the most important part of any customer-centric campaign, understanding what your audience want to hear. And I think it's probably the hardest part of any customer-centric campaign, because once you've understood what your audience definitely wants to hear, and you do have to go outside your comfort zone a little bit to do this. It's not just, I think marketing, we're quite good probably at, working amongst ourselves sometimes and really not going out as much as we could. But by doing it has huge benefits. So once you've got the right information and this is definitely what our audience want to hear, what's the next thing we need to think about?
I guess it's about how you get that content from that amazing workshop that you've done to your audience. It's how do they want to digest this information, because there's lots of different ways that you can do it. But I think it also goes back to how do your audience want to digest it, and there is no right answer that I can say you have to go on your website, you have to do social, because again, it depends on what your audience wants. I'd always recommend having the content on your website because that's where most people go and it gives you a hub of all your content. But then, there are also options to do small bite-sized snippets on social media, and a bit of a mouthful. And what social media platform that is that you go out on depends on your audience and where they are. Do they prefer video content? Do they prefer long form written content? Do they prefer 280 characters on Twitter or 500 characters on Threads now? Like, what do they want? And that's where you need to go. And there's also podcasts like this, webinars, articles, white papers. There's lots of different routes, but the main takeaway needs to be, you need to ask the question to your audience, how do you want this content? And that's the format that you need to be providing it in.
And how do you do that? So that's a really great point. We say, right, we need to know where our audience is, but actually practically, there's a couple of ways you can do that. What are the best ways to really understand where your audience is and how they want to digest the information?
Yeah, so for me, there's two sort of main ways of doing it. One is more expensive than the other. So market research being the more expensive one. But that is a fantastic, way to deep dive. And I would do more than just ask, if you're going to do a market research campaign, I would do more than just ask about what content they want. I would do a massive research pool there. But if market research isn't something you can afford to do or have the time to do, going back to your sales team, ask your sales team to send out user surveys, or, they can reach out to some of their friendlies and say, like, what do you want? They have the relationships, they spent years building them, use those relationships to ask those questions. And, a lot of the time, your customers want to help you because they want to see that information that you're providing, and feeding back that information allows them to get it. So it's sort of a win-win. So yet again, it's go back to your sales team and ask them to be asking the customers.
Actually, from your sales team's perspective, although this is another thing to do, actually, as you say, it helps to build those relationships. And ultimately, it's only going to help the sales team, because if us as marketing can start generating really, really relevant information and information that people really want to see, it's only going to boost your revenue line at the end, because you're going to be moving people through the buyer's journey a little bit quicker. Actually, that brings up a really good point that we haven't spoken about. When we look at all the questions that your audience are asking, which are the ones that actually we should be answering? That's a really interesting question.
Get them through their buyer's journey, I think, are the most important ones. And once you've done the bulk of those, there'll always be more questions in your buyer's journey, but once you've got sort of like 80% of those done, you can then sort of move on to the questions that you get once they become customers, because I think they're still important, because that becomes more about customer retention, and that they're still important questions, but you need to spend primarily your efforts on the questions that happen during your buyer's journey. And what I mean by buyer's journey is from when they hear who you are or they see you for the first time, all the way through until they convert by purchasing your product or your service.
Yes. Yes, and that's absolutely critical, because otherwise the question has to be asked, why are you creating this content? So you could be answering a question, but actually it's not going to get you to move somebody through their buyer's journey. You're doing it for no purpose at all. So you must challenge yourself on why you're doing that.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, so this is the next thing that we need to sort of think about. So we understand what our buyers' questions are. We understand how they want to digest the information. What's the next thing we need to think about? Probably the final thing we need to think about now we've got these two things fixed.
Sort of how they want to receive the information. Do they want to get it in person at congresses? Do they want to be presented it via email? I know we talked about social media. Do they want your sales team to come and speak to them in person and bring blogs and articles with them? There are loads of different, and again, that needs to be, you need to speak to your customers about that, because, you know, some audiences might love your sales team to pop in and have a chat and show them materials. Others might be like, nope, we go to congresses, that's when we want to speak to you, that's when we want the information. So that's all, again, really important information to have when you're creating that customer-centric content.
Mm-hmm. And actually, one thing that you need to think about when you're doing this as well is, if somebody says, like, only want to be contacted by email, in fact, look at the number 1, 2, 3, and 4, because when you look at a buyer's journey, often people are not ready to purchase from you at the point at which they see that one thing. So you need to keep them seeing you on an ongoing basis until they have the problem that you solve. So knowing what the top 4 platforms are for you to communicate with them will allow you to keep you in front of them as you're going, you know, as you move forward. So I think that's an important thing, not just to go for one channel, because you really need to keep it open so that, you know, your users keep seeing you as they move through their journey.
I also think on that, it's very unlikely that every single part of your audience will want information the same way. So, you know, you'll probably have a really broad audience, especially if you think about surgeons. You've got trainee surgeons all the way through into consultants that are potentially retiring soon. They're not going to want information the same way. So you need to do it in multiple different ways to sort of attract all those different subsets in your audience as well. That's really important to think about. I think it's very easy to go, oh, well, 50% of people want email, so let's only do email. Well, then you've literally just halved your audience. So it's important to be hitting all the touch points that where your audience are.
Totally. And you actually, just by mentioning what you did about, you might have different types of people who want to digest things differently. In fact, that's really the first thing that we should do, that we didn't include in this, because it's more that you already understand your audience. But if you haven't got a really clear picture of who your audience is, so are they a consultant surgeon? Are they a trainee? You know, do they have a certain number of years? Do they specialize in this area? If you don't have that understood to start off with, you need to do that first of all, so that you make sure you're really definitely targeting them, because every different group will see things differently. So bunching people or bunching a group saying surgeons will probably damage the effectiveness of what you're doing.
Yes, definitely.
Great. Okay, so I think those are the most important things that you need to think about when you're creating a customer-centric marketing campaign. They're quite simple when we map them out like this, but it's a lot more complicated when you actually do it in reality. Is there anything we've missed, Becca? Or anything else you feel we should say?
I think the main thing I want to stress is that it's understanding what your customers want to hear about. It's really easy to get sidetracked into, oh yeah, but they know that, I want to talk to them about this brand new feature, or I want to talk to them about this. If that's not what they're looking for or the information they want, it's not worth doing. You need to go back to doing the questions that people are asking. And what I also find is that people start doing this, and then they start with all these questions, and then slowly they creep back into, yeah, but I really want them to know this really cool thing. And it's actually like, no, focus on the most important thing, which is, what do your customers want to hear about? And I think that's the main takeaway for me.
Yeah, and actually, from what you said, you know, it's we're talking here about a point in time, one point in time, creating a customer-centric campaign. But in actual fact, what you hinted to and what's true is that it has to be an ongoing process. Because you will always get new questions, and actually this is a rolling thing, so you should always be speaking to your sales team what the new questions are coming up, so that you can keep adapting your campaign to be as relevant as possible moving forwards. So it is a never-ending cycle that needs to continue going.
Definitely.
Excellent. Okay, so in summary of what we were looking at today, so really, in order to create a very effective customer-centric campaign, we need to first of all understand exactly what your customers need to hear about, or you need to understand what your customers want to hear about, and that's really by answering the questions that they're asking. And the best way to do this is by asking your sales team, because they're with your customers every day. A workshop can be a great way of doing this. You might want to bring in an external company to do this. That often works really well. There'll be many people who do this. We, of course, at Podimos do also do this, but we're not the only agency that you can use for this purpose. So then how do they want to digest the information? So what type of media do they want to digest it? Is it blogs? Is it video? Small social media posts, small snippets, things like that. And finally, where are they? So which platforms are they on at the moment? Therefore, which platforms do you need to go out on? So I hope this was helpful, a nice short breakdown of how to create a customer-centric marketing campaign. I think the key here is involving your sales team as well, which I know we've spoken about an awful lot during this podcast. So Becca, thank you very much for attending.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And I hope everyone has a great day. If you need any more information or you want any help with hosting a workshop, please get in contact with us via our website or LinkedIn. And we hope you have a great day and look forward to seeing you at the next Medical Device Marketing Podcast.